Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at chapter 49 from the Road to Latin textbook and translate the story together. Now this story is called De Caesare et Helvetiis, so it's talking about Caesar and the Helvetii. It's continuing on what we've been reading about in the past few chapters, which are adaptations of the first book of De Bello Gallico, right, the Gallic Wars. So we've seen Caesar, the Helvetii, they're trying to migrate, and now we're going to see when they actually meet each other near the modern town of Geneva, right? But before we dive into all that, like I always say, whenever you're doing any of the stories from Road to Latin, if you just want more resources, feel free to take a look at my website. You can find the story there with translations, different buttons to help you with like the cases being highlighted, the vocab, Quizlets, Blue Kits, Gim Kits, whatever you might need to work through all that. There's also practice problems beyond just what you find in the Road to Latin textbook. There's Magistrula links, there's notes, videos, just a bunch of stuff to kind of help you through. So I'd always recommend that if you're trying to learn as you go, using the Road to Latin textbook, take a look at my website and it'll help you out. Now, before we dive too far into it, the first thing I always say, whenever you get to a new chapter, you just heard me mention it a minute before, but you need to learn the vocab, right? And my website will help you with that. But either way, you got to dive in and make sure you know all the vocab, just because it's really hard to understand what's going on if you don't know what the words mean. So first step is always to make a list, practice the vocab, or take mine, take the Quizlet, and practice through something like GimKit, BlueKit, a game, whatever it might be. But just make sure that you feel really, really comfortable with the vocab first. After you feel really good about the vocab, the next step should be to go through the grammar, right? And there's a lot of good grammar notes in Road to Latin. I'll walk you through a little bit of it now, but one way or another, read through the grammar, try to understand what's going on, because the stories are made to help you with the actual grammar. So the idea is by reading the story, you are learning and practicing the grammar. So it's always a good idea to just look at the grammar first so you know what you're looking for. That way you can kind of read the story with a purpose and understand what's going on, okay? The last thing I would tell you to do is before you kind of dive into translating, read it aloud, right? So find a classmate, someone you can read the story to, have them read it back to you. That way you work on your speaking, your pronunciation, and when someone's reading it back to you, you can work on your listening skills. This builds a lot of good like reading comprehension type skills, and it's always the best way to learn Latin. You don't want to just translate it in your head. That's it's a little bit boring, right? It's a language. Bring it to life, but it also helps a lot, particularly in locking the story into your long-term memory. Make sure you've read it aloud and you actually process what's going on. When it does come time to translating, like I always say, do the read and reread method. So read through the entire story once, right? Mark down any problem areas you have. When you're done, try to look them up. If it's vocab, that's very easy. Just use the dictionary from the textbook or my site, whatever it might be. But it's pretty easy to figure out what the words are. The grammar is probably where you might struggle, and odds are if you do run into some struggle, it's probably the grammar for this chapter. So that's a good sign to tell you need to go back and work on the grammar, read through your notes, practice a little more, and then you repeat that process, right? Once you feel like you have a good handle on where you went wrong, read the story again and just keep repeating it, and your list of problems should get smaller and smaller until you're able to read this start to finish without having to write anything down, right? Nothing trips you up. Once you can do that, you know that you're in a good spot and you're ready to move on, okay? So if you haven't done all that, pause the video, go work on it. The rest of the video, I'll walk you through the grammar and then translate the story with you, okay? So just to give you the basics on the grammar, right? Chapter 49 is really diving into more about subjunctive, right, which is what we've been really working on. And it's got a couple of different things. So it's talking about cum clauses, right? You've seen the word cum before, always gets a giggle from my students, but it has a couple of different uses. Sometimes it means when, sometimes it means with. We really want to unpack that. So the first type of cum clause that you get introduced to in this chapter is something we call a temporal cum clause. And you can tell by the word temporal, it has to do with time, right? That's really all we're talking about. So when it's used in the with an indicative mood verb, right? So not the subjunctive, it shows a precise time of an action. This is when we translate it when, right? So if you had the phrase like cum hoc vidi risi, right? When I saw this, I laughed. So here we're not using subjunctive, and it's talking about a very specific time, right? Which is why we translated cum as when. When I saw this, I laughed. That's something we call a temporal cum clause, and they're pretty easy to spot because, again, there's no subjunctive going with it. And the context of the sentence will kind of help you out. Okay? The second type of cum clause is something called the circumstantial cum clause, okay? Now, the biggest difference here is this one goes with the subjunctive. So the verb is going to be in subjunctive mood. So you can kind of catch that right away when you have cum going with subjunctive. Now, this is also translated as when, Okay, so these sentences are showing the circumstances that accompanied or preceded the main verb. So what was going on while this main verb was happening is kind of the idea. The circumstances, literally, that's why we call them circumstantial. The circumstances around the verb. But the big difference is that verb will be subjunctive. Okay, so an example would be if you said cum quatuor dies naviga visemus subito maxima tempestas corta est. So you're saying when we had sailed for 4 days, that's giving the circumstances, right, of what happened. In this case, it's what preceded the main verb, because when we'd already done this. Then it says suddenly a great storm arose, right? So that clause, the cum clause here, is going with subjunctive. That's how you know it's probably going to be something a little different. In this case, it's circumstantial, right? So the main verb, now we go with samus, is in the subjunctive mood. It's pluperfect tense, and it's telling us the circumstances before the storm arose, right? And that's the idea. So it's telling us what happened before. These are the circumstances, right? And you can do that with cum. So even though the temporal and circumstantial are both translated as when, they're kind of doing two different things, right? So that's why it's important to kind of make a list and process all these, okay? The third type are what we call causal and concessive cum clauses. This is the last thing we're going to look at in this chapter. Okay, so these are another use of cum with a subjunctive mood verb, and these sentences show the cause or the reason for the action in the main verb. Okay, and we translate it as since or because, and because is kind of the easy one. If you're showing the cause, you can say because this happened. And again, these are known as causal or concessive cum clauses. So just to show an example, if you said magister navis cum valde timeret suos vetuit nos adiuare. Okay, so it says the captain of the ship, the magister navis, right? The captain of the ship, because or since he was frightened, right? It's saying why he kind of did something. But timeret, you can see there, is imperfect subjunctive. So we kind of have a sense it's going to be something a little different. So since he was frightened, he forbid his men to help us, right? Suos vetuit nos adiuare. So again, in this example, timeret is subjunctive mood, imperfect tense, and it's explaining why the captain forbid his men from helping us, right? So the main idea is the captain of the ship, told his men not to help us. Why did he do this? Because he was very frightened, right? It wouldn't really work here to say when he was very frightened. So that's kind of one way to tell. If you just put in your back pocket the translations of when, since, because, you can kind of test them out, even if you have no idea what type of cum clause it is. Even if you test those out, you'll probably get pretty close to the right answer just by seeing what makes the most sense. Here, it wouldn't quite make a ton of sense to say the captain when he was so scared. It makes more sense to say since or because he was so afraid he didn't help us. Okay, so those three kind of slides kind of give you a little sense of what's going on in the chapter grammar. I would highly recommend that you go through the chapter, right? Either read the Road to Latin notes, which are, find the book, you can find them there, or take mine off my website. If you go with mine, I've added some videos that will kind of help you understand this, just to bring it to life a little bit. There's a lot more you can process and understand, but this is just sort of the taste to show you what's about to happen in the story and give you a little guidance on where you want to go. Okay. The other part of the grammar, which has nothing to do with cum clauses, are what we call semi-deponent and defective verbs. Okay. So this, again, comes right out of chapter 49. But in previous chapters, we've learned about deponent verbs. Those are verbs that have passive endings, but active meanings, right? These are something called semi-deponent in this chapter. So sort of, right, deponent verbs. So these are verbs that have normal active endings and meaning when they're in the present, imperfect, and future tense, right? So the present system, but they use passive forms with active meanings in the perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect tense. And I'll pause right here and tell you, I get it. A lot of my students, their head explodes. Like, why would we do this? I understand. You just got to process it, practice it. You will be fine. Okay. But the idea is they're sort of half deponents, right? So when you're dealing with the present system, so present, imperfect, and future, they're normal. We don't have to worry about it. But when you deal with the perfect system, so perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect, they function as deponent verbs. That's why we call them semi-deponent. Okay. So the list that you're going to see. The one that you actually see in this chapter is audeo audere, right? Aus assume. So you can see audeo. You're like, oh, that's normal. Audeo audere, right? That's the present system. But in the perfect, you have aus assume, and you're like, wait, what's going on here? That's how you can tell it's a semi-deponent verb. This means to dare, right? That's the main semi-deponent you're going to see. But there's a few more that Road to Latin points out that you should know too. So you have gaudeo gaudere, which means to be glad or rejoice, and you can see it's gavivus sum, right? When you get to the perfect. Then you have soleo solere, solitus sum, which means to be accustomed to or in the habit of doing something. And then you have fido fidere thesis sum, which means to trust. Okay, all of these are semi-deponent verbs. I think these are the only ones really that Road to Latin dives into and uses. But again, make a list here. Just pay attention if you see them. I'll try to point them out as we go. But that's the general idea here, right? Semi-deponent verbs. They kind of look like deponent verbs, but only for half of their endings, which I know is annoying. But again, I'll say it, the more you practice this, the better off you'll be, and you'll probably pick it up pretty quickly. Okay? So it's a long intro, but now we've seen a little bit about the grammar. We've dived into what you want to do to attack this chapter. The rest is up to you. So you really need to practice, right? Do some practice problems, learn the vocab, all that good stuff. But if you're ready to move on, now we're going to dive into the actual story. Okay? So chapter 49 is about Caesar and his interactions with the Helvetii, right? So it starts like this. You have Caesare cum consilia Helvetiorum nuntiata essent Roma celeriter profectus est. Magnis itineribus in Galliam ulteriorum contendit et ad Genavam pervenit. Militum quam maximum numerum coigit atque pontem qui erat ad Genavam deleri usit. Cum Caesar milites ex provincia cogeret, Helvetii legatos ad eum miserant. Legati rogaverant ut eos voluntate Helvetiis iter per provinciam facere liceret. Okay? So we'll start from the beginning. Okay, and again, my pronunciation is never anything great, so try to work on your own. But it starts with a cum clause here. So you're saying when the plans of the Helvetii, right, the Consilia Helvetiorum, when these nuntiata essent, when they were announced to Caesar. Okay, so when these get announced, Caesare to Caesar. So in other words, when he hears about the plans of the Helvetii, quickly, celeriter, he profectus est, he set out Roma from Rome, right? So he sets out from Rome and he quickly is on his way up there to deal with this problem. Okay, you have magnis itineribus, right? So through or with great journeys or through great journeys, right? Really, he's talking about like forced marches is the idea. So going very fast. Contended, he hastened into Galliam ulteriorum, into further Gaul, right? So on the other side. So when he finally gets over there, he pervenit ad Genavam. He came to Geneva, right? So he's at basically modern day Switzerland, the lake, which we know is where the Helvetii are going. So he finally shows up. Okay, so then you have militum quam maximum numerum coigit. So he collected coigit as great a number as possible, quam maximum numerum militum of soldiers. So he got as many soldiers as he possibly could. And after he gets them, he ordered the pontem, the bridge, qui erat, which was ad Genavam, right, like across or to Geneva, the bridge to Geneva, he ordered it deleri, to be destroyed. You have a passive infinitive there. So he shows up, he gets as many men as he possibly can, and he burns the bridge. Remember, this bridge is what made this route for the Helvetii kind of easy and something they wanted to try, because there's a bridge across the river, right? So they thought, oh, this would be good. Caesar shows up and he burns the bridge. He's like, not on my watch, right? Not today. Then you have cum Caesar milites ex provincia cogeret Helvetii legatos ad eum miserere. So when Caesar, right, when Caesar collected soldiers from the province, right, cogeret milites ex provincia. So when he had collected them from the province, the Helvetii, they sent miserant, they sent legatos ad eum, they sent messengers to him. Okay, so he gets a lot of soldiers together. He's trying to build up his army, and the Helvetii reach out with envoys, right, with kind of messengers. Okay, legati rogaverant, right. So the legati, the envoys, they asked, ut eus voluntate Helvetiis iter per provinciam facere licere. So the envoys of the Helvetii, they asked that it may be permitted, licere, right, it may be permitted by his will, eos voluntate, it's talking about by Caesar's will, right? So his kind of goodwill, that it might be permitted for the Helvetii, right, Helvetiis, to make a journey through the province, right? So iter per provinciam facere. So they send envoys and they say, hey, do you mind if we go through your Roman land to get to the other side? And then we continue with the next paragraph. You have Caesar cum memoria teneret Helvetios quondam exercitum Romanum sub jugum misisse, eis iter dare dubitavit. Okay, so Caesar, since here it's probably cum is going to make most sense as since, right? Since he remembered, and again literally it says memoria teneret, since he held in memory, kind of a common idiom, but since he remembered that the Helvetios, right, the indirect statement here, that the Helvetii had sent a certain Roman army, a quondam exercitum Romanum, right, a certain Roman army under the yoke, subjugum, right, under the yoke, he hesitated, dubitavit, he hesitated to give them, or to give the journey to them. So in other words, Caesar doesn't let them through. And when you read De Bello Gallico, you'll understand that he's referencing, decades ago where the Helvetii and Romans had clashed. The Helvetii had defeated a Roman army, and to put them under the yoke, it literally means you make like a wooden, kind of like door frame, a yoke, literally, and it's a sign of submission. You force the soldiers to march under it. It's like a disgraceful, shameful thing. So there is a past between the Romans and the Helvetii, and the Helvetii have already defeated them once in battle and like shamed the Roman army. So it's saying since Caesar remembered this, he's like, I don't know if I want to let you through, right? We've had some dealings with the Helvetii before. I'm not trusting you. Okay? Then you have sensit autem, quales essent Helvetii, neque homines bellicosos sine ignoria iter per provinciam facturos esse existimaba. So he sensed, or he realized, however, he kind of sensed of what sort the Helvetii were. So quales essent Helvetii. So what kind of people the Helvetii were. So he kind of sensed them out, and he felt, kind of felt them out, and he judged, right? Existimabat. He judged, he did not judge, because you have neque existimabat. He did not judge that the homines bellicosos, the most warlike people, the most warlike men, they were going to, right, facturos esse, of the future there, they were going to make a journey, right, facturos esse iter, through the province, per provinciam, sine ignoria, without like injury, without damage, or without a problem. So Caesar's looking at them and he's judging and sensing them out. He says, I'm getting a bad vibe from you people, right? What sort you are. And he's like, I don't think you're going to not cause damage. So in his mind, what Caesar tells us is he judges like, this is a bad idea. If I let you through, you're going to cause problems. So I'm not going to let you through, right? This is his big decision. Okay? Then you have cum satis magnum numerum militum in Gallia non haberet, eo tempore contra Helvetios bellum gerere noluit, right? So again, since is probably the translation here for cum, the causal, right? So since he did not have non haberet, there's the imperfect subjunctive, since he didn't have enough men, literally enough of a great number of men, of soldiers rather, militum in Gaul. So he doesn't have enough guys, is the idea. Eo tempore, right? Since he didn't have enough, right, at that time, he did not want Noluit to wage a war, bellum gerere, contra Helvetios, against the Helvetii. So since he doesn't have enough men in Gaul, he decides he doesn't want to wage a war at that time. He does want to wage war on them, just not at that time, right? Not right now. So you have itaque legatos post aliquot dies reverti usit. So he says, and so post aliquot dies is a note that the textbook gives you. It means after several days. So you're saying, and so after several days, no, so he ordered, right, he ordered the legatos, the envoys, to return after several days. So he's saying, come back in a little bit. I'll come up with my decision then, and he's stalling for time. So he orders them to come back after a little bit of time, and you're going to see he's going to use that time to basically prevent them crossing. Okay? So we get to the third paragraph. You have interim Caesar et legio decima ripam rodani multa milia passuum muro fossaque munire coiperant. So meanwhile, right, in the meantime, Caesar and the 10th Legion, his famous 10th Legion, the Legio Decima, they began to munire, to fortify the ripam rodani, the bank of the Rhone River, right? So they start building it up and fortifying it, okay? And they do this for multa milia passuum, for many thousands of paces, right? So many miles is the idea. They do it muro fossaque. They do it with a wall and a ditch. So they start building up this wall and digging a ditch to make a nice fort, and they're fortifying the riverbank. So they're making it hard for the Helvetii to cross. He already burned the bridge, and now he's basically building a fort on the other side. Okay? Then you have milites superioribus proeliis exerciti, brevissimo tempore rem perfecerunt. So the soldiers, having been like trained, exercited, right? Having been trained in previous battles, superioribus proles. So they've already done this before. So he has like sort of his veteran guys. So having been kind of trained by this, they completed perfeceram, right? They completed this work brevissimo tempore, in the shortest amount of time. So they're working really, really fast. It's one of Caesar's hallmarks, right? His engineering skills. So he's working fast, and they get this fort up and running. Then you have ubi legati Helvetii die constituta ad Caesarem reverterant, rather, se Helvetiis iter per provinciam dare posse negavit. So they complete the work, and then you have when the Helvetii legati, the envoys, the Helvetian envoys, you might say, revertera, they returned to Caesar ad Caesarem. Die constituta means like on the determined day, the pre-established or established day. So in other words, on the day they were supposed to come back, they come back and they're like, hey, what the hell's going on? You built a fort, right? So when they returned to Caesar, he denied, so negavit, he denied that he, right, say, posse, this is all indirect statement, that he was able to give, dare. So he denied that he was able to give a journey, an iter, to the Helvetii, right, Helvetiis, per provinciam, through the province. So they come back. He's like, oh, yeah, we'll figure it out. Give me some time. In the time that they gave him, he's built a fort. Now he's like, yeah, no, we're not going to let you across, right? So you can see he stalled, and now he's in a much better position to stop them because he has more troops, he has a fort, and they have to make a pretty dangerous river crossing without a bridge. So this is Caesar's kind of delaying tactic against the Helvetii. Okay, now we get to the fourth paragraph. So this is the end of the story. You have cum Caesar eis iter non dedisset tamen Helvetii vi flumen transire coiperant, rather. So although Caesar had not given non dedisset iter, had not given the journey to them, and again, although kind of works pretty well there. So although he didn't give them the path, the journey, nevertheless, so even though he was kind of a jerk about it, nevertheless, the Helvetii, they began coiperant, they began to cross over the river, flumen transire, by force, right? So they decide, all right, you don't want to give it to us, fine. We're going to take our big army. We're going to just force our way through because we need to get across this river. Okay. Then you have ali inavibus, ali wadis, flumen transire, ausi sunt. Right. So here's our semi-deponent verb, by the way, the ausi sunt. So it says some by boats, navibus, others by the shallows dared to cross, right? So there's ausi sunt, they dared to cross the river. And how are they doing it? Well, some are basically floating across in the boats, but others are looking for shallow places to get across. And the Helvetii start going over the river. Okay. Then you have Magnus fuit labor Helvetiorum ad frustra ausi sunt. Okay, so it was a great labor, right? Fuit magnus labor. It was a great work or a great endeavor or labor of the Helvetii, right? But it was in vain, right? But they dared, ausi sunt, they dared in vain. So in other words, they took up a big undertaking, which was very impressive, but it wasn't going to work, okay? Because Caesar has already fortified the bank of the river, okay? Then you have Helvetii cum die noctuque munitionem per rumpere conarentur, id tamen perficere non potuerunt. Okay, so you have the Helvetii, right? Although, again, another cum clause. So although they tried, conarentur, right, just deponent verb, so they tried. Although they tried to burst through, perumpere, to burst through the munitionem, through the defenses, and they did this die noctuque, by day and by night. So they're attacking consistently. They're trying to break through. So although they did this, id tamen, nevertheless, they were not able, non potuerant, they were not able to accomplish this, id perficere, right? They're not able to do it. So they tried to burst through, but it's not going to work. Okay. Then we end with this. You have tandem munitione et militum telis repulsi cesserunt. So finally, or at last, having been repulsed or repelled by the defenses, munitione, and by the telis militum, by the weapons of the soldiers, they yielded, cesserunt. So at the end of the day, they try to get across. They're trying to kind of get safely through Roman land. Caesar denies them. He burns the bridge. He stalls for time. He builds a fort. And when they try to cross, he repels them and kills a bunch of the Helvetii, right? And at this point, now you have the hostilities ramped up, and it really is the beginning of the Gallic War, where Caesar is taking on this Gallic tribe and fighting them. Okay, so hopefully that made some sense. It's filled with cum clauses. Again, kind of compare what you're looking at against the notes, and you'll be fine. But there's a lot here. It's a really good adaptation, I would say, of again De Bello Gallico. So if you're into Caesar, you look this up. Right, there's a lot of great stuff you can see. The one that I tend to show in my class is Kings and Generals. Has a great video about the beginnings of the Gallic Wars. Well, they have a whole thing about the Gallic Wars, but they cover this and kind of show you the river crossing, what comes after. So take a look at it. But either way, keep practicing, right? Hopefully the vocab felt pretty good, the grammar is pretty good, and you were able to understand the story. If you have any questions at all or any problems, just write them in the comments below. I'm always happy to help. But your best bet here is to keep practicing, do the read and reread method, keep working at it, and you're looking for a point where you're able to read this story start to finish without any problems and understand it. That's how you know you're good. And since this is the only story in chapter 49, if you can do this and feel really good about it and you've practiced a lot, it means you're probably ready to move on from the chapter. Okay? Let me know if you need anything, but otherwise, good luck.